The wind howled like a warning the moment he handed her the reins. Elias Turner had spent his whole life learning one rule of the frontier: never give away your horse. Out here, a man without his horse was a man already halfway buried. And yet, as he stood beneath the burning orange sky, staring into the desperate eyes of the Apache girl, he did something no one in his right mind would do. He let her take it. "You don't understand," he said, his voice tight, fingers still gripping the worn leather. "This horse is my life." The girl didn't speak at first. She couldn't have been older than 17, her dark hair tangled by wind and dust, her face streaked with exhaustion. But her eyes, sharp, fierce, and unbroken, held something that stopped him cold. "My brother," she finally whispered. "He will die without help." Elias hesitated. Out here, stories about Apache raids spread faster than wildfire. Settlers spoke of them in hushed tones, fear, anger, revenge woven into every word. And yet, standing before him now was not a threat. She was trembling. "Alone. Human. You expect me to believe that?" he asked quietly. She stepped closer, her voice shaking but steady in purpose. "You expect me to beg if it was not true?" That struck him harder than he expected. Elias looked at his horse, Dust, a strong, loyal animal that had carried him through storms, hunger, and near death. Then he looked back at her. He saw no lie, only desperation. And something else. Courage. With a slow breath, he released the reins. "Take him," Elias said, his voice low. "Ride hard. He'll get you where you need to go." The girl blinked, stunned. You trust me?" "No," he replied honestly. "But I trust what I see in your eyes." For a moment, she simply stared at him, as if memorizing his face. Then she climbed onto the horse with surprising strength. "I will return," she said firmly. Elias almost laughed at that. No one returned horses out here, not strangers, not enemies, not even friends sometimes. But he nodded anyway. "Go." She turned the horse and rode off into the fading light, her silhouette disappearing into the vast desert. And just like that, Elias Turner was alone, on foot, miles from his ranch. The journey back nearly killed him. The first night, the cold sank into his bones like ice. Without Dust, every mile felt twice as long. His boots wore thin against the unforgiving ground, and the water in his canteen ran out faster than he'd planned. By the second day, regret began creeping in. "You fool," he muttered to himself. "You just handed your survival to a stranger." But every time doubt clawed at him, he remembered her eyes. And somehow, he kept walking. When Elias finally reached his ranch, he collapsed onto the porch before even making it inside. His body ached, his throat burned, and his thoughts blurred into exhaustion. Days passed. No horse, no sign, no Apache girl. Neighbors came by, shaking their heads at his story. "You did what, old mister?" Grady scoffed. "Gave your horse to an Apache. You're lucky you're not dead." Elias didn't argue. Maybe they were right. Maybe he had been a fool. But deep down, something in him refused to believe he'd made a mistake. On the fourth night, everything changed. It started with the dogs. They began barking wildly, their voices sharp and urgent, echoing across the quiet land. Elias sat up in bed instantly, his heart pounding. Out here, nighttime visitors rarely brought good news. He grabbed his rifle and stepped onto the porch, eyes scanning the darkness. At first, he saw nothing. Then, movement, shadows, more than one. Elias tightened his grip on the rifle, every instinct screaming danger. Figures began to emerge from the night, silent, steady, deliberate. Apache. His breath caught. There were at least 6 of them. And at the front, her, the girl. She stepped forward into the faint glow of the lantern hanging by his door. She looked different now, stronger, steadier. No longer desperate. But her eyes, he recognized those instantly. Elias raised the rifle slightly. "You brought friends." The other riders remained still, watchful. The girl shook her head gently. "We brought something else." She turned and gave a signal. And then Elias saw it. Dust. His horse stepped forward, healthy, strong, and not alone. Behind him were 2 more horses, both carrying supplies, food, blankets, tools. Elias blinked, stunned. "What is this?" he asked, lowering the rifle slowly. The girl stepped closer. "My brother lives," she said. "Because of you." Elias swallowed, unsure what to say. "I told you I would return," she continued. But I could not return with only what you gave. That would not honor your kindness. She gestured to the supplies. This is for you. For your ranch. For your survival. Elias shook his head slightly, overwhelmed. You don't owe me anything. Her expression softened. Yes, she said. I do. For a moment, silence stretched between them, no fear, no tension, just understanding. Then one of the Apache men stepped forward. Older, with a commanding presence. He spoke in a firm voice. You showed mercy when you had reason not to. That is not forgotten. Elias met his gaze, unsure but steady. I just did what felt right. The man nodded once. That is why we are here. In the weeks that followed, something unexpected began to grow. Trust. It wasn't sudden. It didn't come easily. But slowly, piece by piece, the distance between Elias and the Apache tribe began to close. They traded goods, shared knowledge, helped one another survive the harsh land that showed no mercy to anyone. The girl, whose name he learned was Ayanna, visited often. She brought herbs when he fell ill. He taught her how to mend fences. They spoke little at first, but words became easier with time. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Elias turned to her. Why did you really come back? He asked. Ayanna smiled faintly. Because kindness is rare, she said. And when it is given, it must be returned. Elias looked out across his land, the same land that once felt so lonely. Now it felt different. Alive. Connected. You know, he said, most folks would say I made a mistake that day. Ayanna tilted her head. Do you believe that? He thought for a moment. Then he shook his head. No, he said quietly. I think it saved me. Years later, people would speak of Elias Turner differently. Not just as a rancher. But as a man who chose trust over fear, and changed more than just his own fate. Because sometimes, the smallest act of courage, handing over something you can't afford to lose, can bring back something far greater than you ever imagined. And on quiet nights, when the wind whispered across the open land, Elias would remember that moment, the girl, the horse, the choice. A single decision, that turned strangers into allies. And fear, into something that looked a lot like hope.